Yeah. Hey, everybody. Welcome. Well, you already know if it's a couple of minutes past. Well, it's actually more than 5 minutes past 11 o'clock on a beautiful Saturday. Finally, I want to say welcome to the Club with Lucas on RCE 106.9 FM and RCE.cat all over the beautiful state of Catalonia and country of Spain and Europe and the world. Obviously, you can find us everywhere on RCE.cat. But also, it is straight up brunch extravaganza today because not only do we have one of the friends to the show, but friend of my family as well for for a few years, we're very young and thin and gorgeous, loves. But our one of my beautiful sisters from another mister, an author, historian, journalist, Carrie Gibson, is streaming in just a little bit for we're going to have a beautiful gab fest about a new book that she has just released called The Great Resistance. And there's so much to do this in reference to slave history, but so much more beyond that, because I think there's a lot of reference points that we're going to touch on later on in the hour. As she streams in again, I say, from South Korea. Did I just say North Korea? Oh, my God. South Korea. Because there's so much that's parlaying what has been written in this book, which I've just started, in fact, this a couple of days ago, in fact, to what is going on right now in the world. So it is very full on real. And I would like to say something else about that. Because in reference to Lady Carrie streaming in as well, the Great Resistance is something that is happening everywhere. We're seeing it here in Spain with some proclamations that were made in the Middle East this week by Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez. But as well, we're also seeing that resistance in many other factors around the world, including the country where both Carrie and I were born, in the United States of America. Following this hour, my beautiful people, you can also take wind of what's happening with my mate, Rob. Rob Gerard is one of the leaders here for Dems Abroad, and he and I have launched a podcast. We started it in tip-top shape and just, dancing around the tulips last year. It's called The Way Works Now, and we will be recording a new hour and Par 13, streaming in with Lady Kina Blam in just a little bit as well after this hour. But obviously, we want you to pay attention to what's going on here. The Club with Lucas is where you can find me on IG. You can also listen to the jams that we will be throwing throughout the hour. Sometimes, I would like to say, sometimes there are moments where we cannot play songs on YouTube. So if you hear them fade out while you're watching us with your peepholes, that's why. But you can always catch the gems live all over Catalonia 106.9 FM and online at rce.cat. You can also follow me at English Radio BCN on Facebook. And of course, the tunes can be found at RCE 106.9 FM at YouTube if you want to listen, if you want to play along with us. Pitter patter, let's get at her. I would like to throw on a little bit of music right now as we wait for a little bit of news to come in. I mentioned a proclamation that was coming in from Pedro Sanchez. I want a little bit of an update on that as well. It is about the fact that under 16s will not be able to use social media in this country starting very soon. But first and foremost, I would not be the man that I am if I did not play a new single by the sister that we're going to do right now. That woman is Amy Grant. Yes. Who is she? She's the queen of contemporary Christian pop music. But she's released an interesting historical take on many things, actually, that are highlighting the world right now, but have certainly led a trail of breadcrumbs over to the world that we live in right now. This is called The 6th of January. It's her new single. And we'll be right back in just 3 minutes, everybody, here at rce.cat. Oh, yeah, man. And that is the 6th of January, Yasgur's Farm. Yasgur's Farm, by the way, is the big field where the original Woodstock took place. And so that's what she's referencing, that and Marvin Gaye and Martin Luther King. And there's so much more. And I just want to give a shout out to Amy Grant because I love her. But I also want to give a shout out to people who are in the resistance and fighting. Again, for the fifth year in a row, the European Bank, as well as the IMF, is stating that it's very likely that Spain will be, again, the leading growth economy, certainly in Europe, if not the world. For the past 4 years, Spain has been the top growth economy in the world. And last year, with a nearly growth increase of 3.1% last year, which, I mean, I would just like to say, in comparison, Germany had 1% growth. So there's something that Mr. Pedro Sanchez has been doing well. There was also a conference that happened with world powers, and I didn't even want to get into it in the Middle East because I just can't, and I won't. But Mr. Pedro Sanchez has publicly announced a couple of days ago that the Spanish government is now intending to ban social media, all social media use, sans Twitch. I want to say that because I didn't see Twitch all up in that list. Oh, hi. But everything else, including Snapchat, is in there. Was banning social media use for children under 16 as part of a stronger protection for minors online. This is an obvious thing. This was said in Dubai, my favorite, where slavery doesn't happen. The measure would require The measure would require age verification systems on platforms and is part of a broader digital safety package aimed at combating harmful content. Now, obviously, this has already been put in action, rather, in Denmark, France, and Australia, as I recall. And there are a couple of others that are joined in as well. The proposal is being drafted right now. In fact, it's been drafted as of this next week. As part of the law for the protection of minors in digital environments, this is new legislation that they are forming in Moncloa for the people of Spain, which would formally raise the age for content or an account access as well, and potentially criminalize certain platform failures. Now, they say potentially. I'm saying, according to Sanchez, he said they will go after people, specifically he named and checkmarked Elon Musk and X for the rampant use of not only doxing, but just those deep fakes that have been putting on in reference to some heinous things that were put up with babies and faces. It's disgusting. And so already the offices, if you don't know, the offices of X were raided in Paris this past week, and there is much reason for that. The government does not yet have final parliamentary approval. Obviously, the proposal still will need to pass through the legislative process in the Cortes Generales in Madrid. Hopefully, the PP will not stand in the way of progress for their own children, but, after what we've learned in the Epstein files, which we will talk about in my next hour in the podcast, I will not put anything above people of that ilk. Now, the political and public response to this has been a little bit different. That has drawn obvious support from certain parents and educational advocacy groups, as well it should, but also criticism and skepticism about enforceability and freedom online. Obviously, we already know there, as we learned immediately from Australia, that kids, the kids have a way around it. But we'll see. Obviously, an action that we would be putting here would be you would have to sign in with in any form of social media other than Twitch. Want to keep saying that. I say that because of the addiction Twitch can throw in with people who are gamers, and we have a major problem with boys in that aspect. But anyway, you will have to enter your ID, your national state ID, and if you are under 16, there will be no access at all. It will just shut down, apparently. European institutions have signaled broad support for stronger protections, but also they are cautioning about how this could fit in with other EU digital laws. Do not stand in the way. This has not yet become law, but because Parliament still needs to pass this approval. But it might be passing approval, just saying. Okay, that's it. I need to get to my sister. We have a quick little ditty because obviously the Grammys were also last week or this past week, a few days ago, actually, Sunday here. And I went to, in fact, Monday morning here in Spain. But I would like to say that I was nonplussed about it all. I was actually very, very relieved that people who probably should have won did win. And did anybody else know that Justin Bieber had a record out called Swag Vomit Vomit? Oh, bless the children. I don't know if he's long for this world, but this woman is, and her name is Olivia Dean, and that's all we need to know because this is a song called Man I Need. We're going to cut it short because I've got a sister to zoom into in Korea. We'll be right back with Lady Carrie Gibson, author, journalist, historian. Ah, yeah. That was Olivia Dean, and I believe I am now streaming into Hong Kong. No, I mean North Korea. I mean South Korea. Lady Carrie Gibson, are you there, madam?
Hello, good to have you here.
Hey, there she is. Everybody,
Yay.
welcome to the Club with Lucas. But everybody who's watching and going to be watching in the future, because this is when it really gets live with people. Carrie Gibson, thank you so much for streaming in from the Korean Isles. Oh my God, family. I'm just going to tell the folks I had really messed up, and I was talking to my sister coming down to the studio, my sister being Carrie, excuse me, Miss Gibson. And I swear to God, I asked if you, how was Hong Kong? I asked you how the weather in Hong Kong was, and you're like, I don't know. How is the weather in Seoul right now?
It's freezing.
Is
So,
it?
so just to clarify, you weren't wrong. So, hello everybody. Hello Lucas. You weren't hey, you weren't wrong. We went to Hong Kong for Christmas and New Year, but
That
for your listeners, I listen. For your listeners who don't know me, I left London a couple of years ago, and my husband and I are living in Seoul, South Korea, for his job. So
exactly.
we're in an exciting new place. It is freezing. It's barely been above freezing for all of January, and even into February. It's -8 right now. So
Madonna. Okay.
it's
So
cold. Yeah,
could we
it's
say
cold.
that it is definitely? Would you say that it's colder than London then?
Oh, by a long shot. It just goes below freezing for it gets the Siberian winds. It goes below
There we
freezing.
go.
It gets very, very hot in the summer, very, very cold in the winter. So very unlike the British 10 degrees and drizzly and grey. So very,
Uh,
very different.
My queen, as before we get into the Great Resistance, because we really have, I mean, and thank you for letting me send the smorgasbord of questions earlier this week. But before we get into that, what is the difference that you've noticed? Because you do have to parlay your life between the UK, the US, and obviously they're in Asia now. Have you noticed or felt a major difference, or what would be one of those between the London life and where you're living right now? Out of my own personal
Uh,
curiosity, actually.
right. I'm living in a city of about 10 million people in Seoul, and in a country of about 50 million people,
Hmm.
and there are 4 million foreigners.
Wow.
This is a very Korean place. So if you know London, as you do,
Uh-huh.
London is a very diverse,
It is.
very multicultural, multilingual, multi everything. And Korea is very Korean. So it's very interesting to live in a very big city, that is very different to London. I mean, that being said, it's wonderful, but it's very different
Hmm.
because you go to London, you kind of think you're just, I don't know, in the world in a different way, and here, you're definitely in East Asia.
Hmm.
Also, everything works. Everything's efficient. The trains work. It's wonderful. It's like everything's efficient. The food is amazing. So yeah. There's a lot to recommend it, and I certainly recommend your listeners to come and visit South Korea.
Okay, well, I need
It
to get
is
there and
just
visit.
absolutely a joy. Yeah.
Oh, my nerves. That was so funny, though.
Yes, you too.
I totally hear you. I wonder what the laws are like to bring dogs. Can I bring the baby? This is
They love dogs. Oh my God. Everybody
really.
has little dogs here. Oh
eh,
no, this is the most dog loving place I've ever seen, even more so than London. And I know we're here to talk about serious things, but I will talk about dogs for a second because
Amen, please.
there was a statistic there was a statistic that came out recently that more people buy little prams for their dogs now than they do for children. Because the birth rate's gone off a cliff here, and so more people have dogs, and you see them pushing their little dogs around, and it's great. I love dogs, so I'm like, this is great,
Child, it has commenced here. In fact, since 2024, there are now more domesticated pets in Spain than children. In the last, they
Yeah.
did that cifra in 2024. So that's a good thing. I
Yeah.
don't know how many of those babies actually came from the Americas. So let's pop into that. Okay. I know the parrots that fly around Barcelona came from the Americas. But there is the fact, and this is something that I haven't put on yet, but what I love is besides the title, we have another subtitle underneath our heading. It's the 400-year fight to end slavery in the
For your
Americas.
viewers.
There it is. Thank you,
Hmm.
love. There it is. And I want to give another extra shout out because the PDF was beyond. I did not expect that. I was so beaming with joy, and I just started it 2 nights ago. Thank you. So got
Oh,
a lot to
good.
get through. And what it does talk about here, it's about the first African revolt from 1521 on the island of Hispaniola to the Maroon Wars of Jamaica, the revolution that gives Haiti its independence. And also, I mean, we could talk about Haiti right now for the rest of the hour. But there's so much that goes on. And as someone who also does history tutoring here for university and the level here, there is an element where I always make sure to let them thank me for their food um, here in Spain when I'm teaching because there's just there's a blank page in many aspects of history, and as both of us who
Mhm.
come from that background, can we please talk about it? What led to this one? Because there is a chain of books that have led to this as well. So if we can talk about that and then jump into the Great Resistance, please.
Sure. I mean, if anything, this is kind of I've kind of written a trilogy, I
Hmm.
suppose you could say.
Yep.
So my first book was called Empire's Crossroads, and it came out 2014, and it's a history of the Caribbean from Columbus to the present day, so the kind of imperial era and then post-colonization. My second book is called El Norte, and that is about the Hispanic past of the United States and the United States' relationship with its neighbors. And then this third book, The Great Resistance, looks at the entire Americas. So yes, I have a theme: colonialism,
That's right.
slavery, abolition, post-colonialism, independence. But yeah, this. All of my work up to this point has focused on the Americas and the very particular story of the Americas.
And it's interesting to me, and this is again a bit of a side note from the questions list, but you're also someone born from the in the Americas, but you also
Mhm.
left it rather early, a couple of decades
Mhm.
ago, when you were very, very, very,
I'm not
very
that old.
young, darling. And then you have deep dived in through your career, through journalism, through so many things, really breaking down the systemic mentality behind the Americas. Why, especially as an Anglo-Saxon sister, did you want to dive into that Spanish background and that so much? I'm curious about the root of that.
So I think in some ways where you're from never leaves you.
Amen.
And I grew up in the deep south of the US. And I know I don't sound like I do anymore, but I do. I did. And
And at the end, everybody,
and
she's
I,
going to
I
put
grew
this
up in a
accent on. Excuse me, I interrupted you.
no. Um, but yeah, I think that I've always been interested in questions of slavery and freedom. And I lived in the South. Like, I
Yeah.
lived in places that had redlining. I lived in places that were the schools had only been desegregated 20 years before I started school. Like, I lived in places where there was a lot of very active racism. And then I moved to Britain, and in Britain, obviously, they had their own colonies and their own grappling with sort of racial legacies and stuff. But I didn't really know very much about European colonialism because,
Yeah.
as you know, growing up in the US, it's like, well, there were the 13 British colonies, but then, we had the American Revolution, the end. And it's like, oh, actually, what Europeans were doing in the Americas is a pretty important and huge
Mhm.
story.
Huge.
And I just felt that so much of understanding the state of the world, certainly the state of the United States, but the state of the entire Americas, we have to start with 1492.
Mhm.
I mean, we just have to, and we have to keep going over all of this until we can make sense of it. And I think we're working on that. But the more we know, the more we can understand. But it also has to be disseminated. It has to be taught. It has to be talked about. It has to just be, part of the fabric of conversation. And I would love to live in a world where people eventually say to me, "Oh, I knew that. Oh, I knew about the Haitian
Mhm.
Revolution. Oh, I knew about," but we're not in that world yet.
Nope.
We're getting there. It's, social media and the internet has absolutely broadened people's knowledge, but there's so much that is still unknown because also things are often very linguistically divided.
That's
And,
right.
you know, sort of Brazil stays separate to Spanish America, which stays separate to the English speaking like Caribbean and the US. And these things still kind of remain quite linguistically isolated, certainly in terms of historical output or, just kind of cross cultural knowledge. You need to have other languages.
Amen.
And I'm trying to bridge that gap too with the Great Resistance, well, with all my books.
Yeah, exactly.
Because learning Spanish was so formative for me. It was just so, it opened, look at all the doors it opened. And so I'm always a huge proponent of, multilingualism. So.
Okay. You know what? The fact that you just mentioned 1492, and
Mm,
we're broadcasting here from Spain, where that really sent
mhm,
off from the Isles here. Why do you think it's such
mm,
a, in reference to the Great Resistance, to get back to the title, and um,
mhm.
why do you think the Great Resistance in 1492 have to connect, and why do you want to start there?
Well, you actually have to start slightly earlier. So with the
Mm,
Great Resistance, I actually started in 1444,
okay.
really. I mean, a little bit even earlier than that, because we don't actually start with the Spanish. We have to start with the Portuguese, who often
Mm.
don't like to be brought into this conversation. And so when we look at how the African slave trade begins, it's with the
That's
Portuguese.
right.
Um, and now, where people are taken in Portuguese ships turns out to be a lot of, places claimed by the Spanish crown, so
Yeah.
the Americas.
Hmm.
But the initial triangular trade, the initial voyages to Africa, and taking captives and taking. At first, they took people back to Lisbon, and then from Lisbon, people were traded through to places like Valencia. I read about Valencia in the book,
Hmm.
Sevilla. And then as the, colonization begins in the Americas, slave ships began to take captives to the Americas. Um, so including Hispaniola, where a certain
Exactly.
Christopher Columbus showed up. So completing the circle. So you had a little bit of a slave trade already going before 1492. The first African captives who were recorded going to Europe were written about in 1444 in Lagos, Portugal.
Wow.
So, uh, so,
Lagos,
you, so,
Portugal.
so that
Name of the
system's
month.
kind of in Lagos, Portugal, and so, and I write about this at length in the Great Resistance. As part of kind of setting the scene, and how this whole system gets going. Because I think sometimes the Hollywood version makes it seem like this only happened in the United States,
Hmm.
and I think that's again because people are becoming more aware and more knowledgeable, and information is shared more freely. You can find a lot about these things on the internet now. People, I think, have a better idea that the
Definitely.
transatlantic slave trade was not just to the United States, it was to many, many, many places.
And I honestly, the other day in one of my university sessions, we were talking about the fact that slavery still continues in places like Dubai and things of that nature, obviously in a different
Hmm.
way. And so it really hasn't stopped.
Hmm.
The resistance then needs to continue. But when we talk about it in the form of where the book is going, you also mentioned that
Hmm.
there's many things that people are not going to know anyway, but is there a connection between why you felt you had to write, like do a little bit of a pushback against these dominant narratives? Because if you don't, what do we risk, by not doing so? The
I mean, in
narratives that
some
I'm
ways,
so sorry.
mm,
Please,
no, no,
no,
no.
you go. You go.
I was just going to say that um, the narratives that I'm pushing back against a couple of things,
Yes.
is a slightly longer tradition of centering white abolitionists or the white abolitionist movements
Hmm.
rather than the actual enslaved people who fought for their freedom. There's been a historical turn. There have been more works on this. A lot of them have been kind of, sort of smaller studies that I draw from in this book. There's a lot of amazing scholars out there doing really terrific work.
Yeah.
But again, I think there's this idea that white people freed the slaves rather than enslaved people working for 400 years to free themselves. I think that's very important. I mean, you bring up modern day slavery,
Hmm.
and that is very important, but it's very distinct
Yes, it
from what I
is.
read about in the Great Resistance but it's an afterlife, right? It's an afterlife of slavery, just like
Unfortunately.
racism is an afterlife of slavery.
Hmm.
Exploited labor. We still haven't quite figured out how to get rid of all exploited labor. We still haven't figured out how to get rid of racism. Well, where did some of these things start? On the slave ships, right?
Exactly.
So it's a pushback for that, absolutely as well, and it's kind of an engagement, and it's also I kind of hope that the reader thinks about the fact that having slavery was the system that it was the water that people swam in for over 400 years. In the same way you could argue about capitalism, you could, there's other systems, but slavery was a system that affected everyone. It didn't just affect enslaved people.
Yeah.
It affected everyone, because how couldn't it, right? And so that's what I, again, try to really, I hope, bring out in this book as well.
Definitely. Did you ever step back from the material because you found it like, I don't know why I just threw in like, but did you ever step back away from it because you felt that it was just, okay, this is a bit too much right now. I'm going to put this to the side for a moment. Like the way that I'm doing with the Epstein files.
Well, no, I think because I tried to keep focusing on the stories of going towards freedom.
Yes.
And there's a lot of grisly endings. I mean, most of them end badly, like, especially when you think of things like actual revolts. There are other cases that end happily. People win their freedom suits. People are manumitted. There's Haiti. But there's a lot of blood. There's a lot of violence. There's a lot of deaths. And reading a lot of those records and those accounts was more a frustration because they were only one-sided usually. They were only written by kind of colonial authorities. But they felt like reading war records. And I tried to kind of stay away from the kind of horrors of the plantation. There's a lot of... there's already a lot of scholarship on, how awful kind of plantations were. And so I didn't feel the need to go too deep into that in the book.
Correct.
But the other thing that I read that I did kind of, the thing I read that made me perhaps quite uncomfortable was the failings of white abolitionists and white allies. It's pretty grim reading, actually, when you think about it.
Could you do a synopsis?
There's a lot of...
Excuse me for interrupting.
So, no. So for instance, well, I mean, basically almost every place that had top-down abolition, i.e., from governments or what have you, it was gradual, right? No, Haiti is kind of the only place where, well, interestingly, it was abolished in 3 stages during the Haitian Revolution. It's all quite complicated. But, when the final push came on to get rid of Napoleon and set up a new country, that was the heart of the country. No one's going to be a slave here.
Exactly.
Everywhere else, British abolition passed in 1833, but there's an apprenticeship period for 6 years. Brazil, there is Rio Branco law, again, a period of, apprenticeship. And I kind of put that in air quotes because it's unpaid servitude.
Hello.
And it's a way of compensating the masters, right, the enslavers. It's a way of giving them more, an extra bit of labor before slavery ends.
May I ask a question? So no, please finish that. No, I don't want to interrupt the flow though. And there is to everybody listening, there is a slight delay of about 2 to 4 seconds, and so I do interrupt sometimes. Please forgive me, Carrie. But you just mentioned in some way of paying reparations to the slave owners, and one of the things that have had a discussion in one of my uni sessions, or many of them, is that up until not too long ago, I do believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, there was some form of reparations that had been paying through the UK to farmers who had let go of their slaves in the 19th century. Was that not continued, some reparations that were paying to certain farmers in the UK?
So what happened was, in 1833, 20 million pounds was given to enslavers, excuse me, to compensate them for their losses. And the debt that was incurred for that was only recently paid off.
Okay. That was how it went. All right.
So the payment was like a one-off, but the government borrowed money.
Obviously, 20
Does that make
million,
sense?
definitely.
So 20 million was a ton of money back in 1833. And paying that debt off took a long, long, long time. And Haiti had to pay 150 million French livres for France to recognize its sovereignty in 1825, again, crippling its economy. So the question of who paid what to whom is quite a complicated one, and not a particularly pretty story.
Exactly.
So when it's more those things that I went, wow, this is just I mean, yes, everything. I mean, everything is difficult to read. But I hadn't really investigated much about the white abolitionist part of it, and
Mm-hmm.
now and governments and institutions and the church and all of it. It's really surprising well, maybe it isn't, the hypocrisy. There was a lot of hypocrisy. There was a lot of failure. And some people would argue back to me and say you shouldn't judge those times on our values. But I would say Haiti put immediate freedom at its heart in 1804. This isn't some kind of crazy 21st century idea.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And
So, I think that people should be, and also I should point out about France, because again, this kind of gets lost. So France, because of what's going on in Saint-Domingue and the slave revolt, slavery gets abolished across the French Empire in 1794. And then Napoleon Bonaparte comes in, and he wants to take back Saint-Domingue, but he also wants to reinstitute slavery in 1802. And he does. And that's the final nail in the coffin for Saint-Domingue. They break away. They manage to defeat France, but nobody else does. So France has a second abolition in 1848. So I feel like sometimes that does
wow.
not sink in
No.
about the history of slavery and abolition in Europe. France reinstituted slavery and then re-abolished it.
When was the re-abolishment, please? Because I don't recall that.
1848.
It was 1848.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it would have been like Martinique, Guadeloupe, French Guiana, Saint Martin,
Exactly.
St. Gallen. So it's smaller colonies. Like Haiti was its biggest kind of Caribbean colony, but it still re-enslaved people. So yeah. So again, things that maybe people don't quite know or aren't quite aware of.
And specifically here in this side of where so much of it happened in the Iberian Peninsula, let me tell you. And it would be another 15 years after that re-abolishment in France where we did the same thing. And yet, 1863 to win civil rights, really, that's 90-something, 99, almost 100 years in our own country where there was this, Jim Crow's law, count the marbles in this jar if you want to. These types of things. When we talk about these connections between the past and the present and all the recent drama that I mentioned at the intro 45 minutes ago, what lessons from history do you think we're risking or already forgetting as a society? Although you've kind of implied this already.
I think that this is a difficult question, I think, in some ways. We really shouldn't don't trust your institutions and don't trust your leaders, but kind of don't. Power is in the people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, and I think we are seeing that at the moment. But, I think what's kind of one of the things that was difficult about writing this book is realizing that, there's a whole system in place that is actively oppressing people. And it exists for, 400 years. And it takes 400 years to break it down. It takes a long time to dismantle it. And we need to remember that sometimes historical change is slow until it's not.
Yeah.
And so things feel very intractable.
Yep. You know what?
Until they all change.
This is so relevant to everything that's happening right now. You said that, and I just thought of ping, so many things right now. Okay, what surprises you most about what people don't seem to learn then? Because if we can see these patterns, and I do not like to say, especially as someone with history, history has a pattern, but history repeats itself, but it definitely has a pattern. So what are some of the things is there anything that angers you or really sticks in your craw about these things that people don't seem to understand in an obvious manner?
I mean, it's kind of, in some ways it's kind of hard to say because I feel like there's such kind of educational gaps. Some people seem really knowledgeable and some people don't seem to know anything. So it's almost hard to generalize. That's a little bit of an issue when thinking about this, right? But then there's the people who don't want to engage with any history at all but shut down conversations. And that's very frustrating, I
Mm-hmm.
think. And we're at this kind of unfortunate moment where a lot of the discussion and conversation that came out of George Floyd in 2020 has stopped. And my book is a contribution to trying to keep those conversations going. And just because something makes you uncomfortable doesn't mean you shouldn't engage with it.
Exactly. Like Bad Bunny performing at the Super Bowl. Yet another resistance. This this type of when you feel powerless, and it's one of the questions I sent, but so many people that I've been listening to who do their own little citizen journalism on YouTube or whatnot talk about how many people that they are dealing with in the streets, Minnesota, for example, things they feel powerless when you're doing a resistance movement. So I'm wondering how can ordinary people practice their own resistance when they're learning things from the knowledge that is in whether we're talking about Empire's Crossroads del Norte and the new book, The Great Resistance, now available where all good books are sold, specifically more in the US and UK. But you can also find this obviously on Amazon.com, correct?
Yeah, that is
Exactly.
correct. Yeah,
Amen.
and the audiobook version as well. So,
Brilliant. And so, for anyone who feels powerless, is there anything that you would suggest from the knowledge that you've called together, the wisdom you've called together, that you would offer as some form of tidbits or advice?
um, I mean, a lot of this book is like active violence and revolts and that sort of thing. So I wouldn't recommend that necessarily. But what I would recommend, and this is something that again is another theme, is pressuring institutions.
Hmm.
If you are in a position to do that, that's, I think, a really helpful place to chip away. There are a lot of freedom suits in the Spanish speaking world, even in early America, early United States, in New England, people after the American Revolution, basically, enslaved people petitioned in Massachusetts and New Hampshire saying, how can we have a state constitution? How can we have this freedom and us be enslaved? And that's when you started to see the implementation of
Yeah.
gradual abolition measures. So I think that institutions are really, rather than leaning on them and expecting them to lead,
Mm.
is actually challenging them and demanding that they step up.
That's right.
Whether that's calling your congressman, whether that's doing some pro bono work as a lawyer, whether that's using your voice as a journalist. Um, I think pressing against institutions can go a long way. And to not, I guess, to not lose hope. I mean, this battle to end, chattel slavery,
Hmm.
people in chains, was a long fight.
That's
And
right.
so,
And it still continues. I love
everybody's got to buckle up.
that's right. Because I
Yeah.
sometimes wonder if it's going to get worse before it can get a little better. If you could distill the book, obviously there's so much to get this to get from this. And again, I want to repeat, it is called The Great Resistance, but there's also the books before it called El Norte and Empire's Crossroads, her first book, which is already past 10 years, love. But
I know.
distilling the book into one idea, what would you like people to take away with it as they read it, as I've just started
Um,
it, but as they read it?
I think if there's any one idea, it's, intractable problems are not intractable.
Mm,
The world can change. The world will change. And, I think humans have a lot of agency in helping guide that change, even if it doesn't feel like it at the time. And
yeah.
I'm thinking about this in terms of other problems we have right now, like climate change. It
Hmm.
feels pretty intractable, right? Well, something's going to happen. And it's really down to, publics, it's down to institutions, it's down to pressure to
Okay.
make, help the direction.
I think what I'm getting from the last two questions and responses is the people have the power and they need to take that power back into their hands. One of the things that we were speaking of before is that there's a breakdown where they want to take away this possible, the possibility of social media for people under 16 in this country, which is
Mhm.
fabulous
Mhm.
because I believe that has,
Mhm.
in some ways, inhibited the ability to more critical thinking and things of that nature. And people do have the power. One of the
Yeah.
things that a lot of these citizen journalists back in the country where we were born, they keep putting up the general numbers to call your congressman, to call your senator, to call the
Mhm.
switchboard because it is what you're saying. The people have to take that power back and pressure, pressure, pressure. If there are Well, what conversations would you like to see or hope to see the Great Resistance starting, the book and beyond?
I mean, I think that the hill I always go die on is that the United States is, does not stand alone. It
Hmm.
is a país latinoamericano.
Eso,
It
way.
is, it is part of the Americas. It has had a particular trajectory
Hmm.
that has made it a different place. Not, I mean, each country has its own trajectory.
That's right.
The US got a lot. It has a lot. It has a lot more than its neighbors. That's true. That doesn't mean it can ignore the history that it shares with its neighbors. And
Mm.
I do think that one of the ways through this history of trying to reconcile the afterlife of slavery, but also, indigenous genocide throughout the entire, hemisphere as well,
That's right.
we have to have alliances with other countries. The US cannot do this alone. I think that's the thing. And again, it's so linguistically blocked, except for the 60 million Spanish speakers. But, I mean, like, it's not like it's not like, in Holland, people grow up and they speak like 3 or 4 languages. It's
Hmm.
not like, I think in the Americas, you should be able to speak, you should be taught like at least the major European languages and then like a couple of indigenous languages or, like there's all kinds of possibilities. And of course, that's not nowhere on the cards. It never has been, and
True.
it's a real loss because it's easier to craft solidarity if you can kind of communicate. And I'm sure there are channels. I mean, it's not to say that there's nothing, but I just feel like thinking about the Americas as a whole and trying to have that kind of unity together and having conversations across places, across Brazil and the US and Argentina. And like, I think
Mm.
that will eventually be very, very fruitful in dealing with these particular post-colonial legacies.
Definitely. Definitely. I love that. There is, I guess, I have so many more questions, and I just saw the time right now. Okay. I guess there's so much more we could talk about always. And the next time you're here, you're coming into the studio, CRC. But
Yes.
when the weather changes, it's been cold and rainy here, like insane. But if there's something that you're paying attention to in the world, is there anything you feel you might have overlooked or you would like to focus on that's not in the book right now, especially with everything that's happening at the moment?
You mean kind of related to this
Related to,
topic?
but yeah, but affecting us in a more au courant manner right now.
So the two things that I feel are kind of the big intractable social problems of the day are
Hmm.
climate change and AI. And both of them I need to learn more about. I don't know enough. I'm not a historian of science or environment. So those are two, very big stories. In terms of working on sort of Latin America and race, I'm quite interested in a lot of the resurgence of eugenicist language that's been coming back. And I'd like to kind of connect that and think about that a little more rigorously, maybe
Hmm.
within a future project. Because, just sort of more 20th century, or late 19th, early 20th century stuff. Again, this is one of those afterlives of slavery. The kind of
Definitely.
eugenicist language that emerges in that period and that we're seeing a resurgence of again. So
Yes, I had
I think
some.
that's something to pay attention to.
I am
Mm,
so glad you said that because I had somebody who was referencing this the other day in a session about eugenics. And
mhm.
the claim or the belief is that it is only about um, white Anglo-Saxon folk who believe that their race is the only one, and there's so much more behind this. It's not just that, obviously, and there's so much more behind that study. And the I guess mainly because so many people who did do this, in eugenics and that stuff, were usually of a certain persuasion and the indoctrination by the Nazis and whatnot. But why do you mention eugenics? I'm flipping because we just talked about it this week in my sessions. Really quickly, I know
So
you
one
just
of the
said,
things
but
that I'm interested in, yeah. No, one of the reasons I'm interested in it in terms of Latin America is I think about what whiteness means. And my background is on my mother's side Italian, and of
Mhm.
course Italians in the United States were not quite white until I don't know, the 60s, 70s,
Mhm.
whenever it was
Yeah.
politically useful to call Mediterranean people white. And the Irish, and I'm part Irish as well. So it's like, oh, when the Catholics got to be included. But you go south of the Caribbean, and it becomes emblancamiento in
Mhm.
Argentina,
Oof.
in Brazil. And it's like, oh, hey, we need more white people.
Mhm.
Come over, Italians.
Mhm.
so wait a minute. What is it? What is whiteness? What does that mean? Like,
Mm,
who's whitening what? Who's the good immigrant? Who do you want in your country?
mm.
It raises a whole bunch of questions, and this is all kind of late 19th, early 20th century, and it speaks again to what's going on with immigration policy in Britain,
Mhm.
certainly in
Oh,
the U.S. And, Spain is the outlier here, saying,
500,000
yeah,
more. Yeah, it's right. And I would,
yeah, yeah. So it's really,
it's true,
really extraordinary.
that is something that should have been mentioned too. Thank you for saying that because it was also the government institutions of Zapatero, Aznar, and Felipe Gonzalez who also did this as
Hmm.
well, specifically Aznar and Zapatero.
Hmm.
So, Lady
Hmm.
Carrie, I wanted everybody to know you can get the book on Audible and on Amazon.com and wherever good bookstores are selling them all over the US and UK as well. I'm sure there's going to be another influx of the production here, hopefully the publication rather in Spain. Do we have any time for that? Is there going to be, do we know anything about that by any chance?
I hope I mean, I don't have a Spanish deal yet,
Okay.
but let's put
Mm-mm-mm.
that out there. I will say for your readers, there is a version in Castellano of El Norte,
Beautiful.
published by Editorial EDAF. So you can get one of my books in Spanish. So
Mira, Editorial Adaf, and you can get that El Norte, which was her second book from a few years ago. And I believe twin brother may have helped with a little bit of that, maybe, as I recall.
yes,
Listen,
yes, yes, he
Lady
did.
Carrie Gibson, The Great Resistance is the book. I wonder if you could hold the book really quickly one more time, if you could, love.
Yep,
Yes,
yep.
because I'm going to take a picture of that later on YouTube. The Great Resistance is the book, and you can get it wherever good books are sold as well. Carrie, we have so much more to talk about. Thank you. So much love as well from my sister and my father who wanted
Thank
me to tell
you.
you that, please. So we're sending that to
Oh,
you. And
oh,
folks,
send
get
them
that
my
book
love.
when you get. I shall. And Carrie, I will not be a stranger anymore. So we'll be. I'll be bothering you after the show.
Good.
Go get some rest though, because it
Good.
is 9 hours ahead.
Thank you.
Much love to you and Papa
Yeah,
C as
yeah.
well, please. All right, love. Talk to you
Bye.
soon.
Thank you.
And folks, this is
Bye.
why we do what we do here at the Club with Lucas. Remember, that is Lady Carrie Gibson. You can get all three books of hers, The Empire's Crossroads, El Norte, which is also available in Spanish here by Adaf Publication, editorials here in Spain, as well as her new book, Empire's Crossroads, which is available all over Amazon, amazon.co.uk, as well as in Audible. Folks, we will be right here, same bat time and channel next week as well. But also, in just a few minutes, we're going to rearrange a few things, and we'll be right back with the Way Works Now podcast number 13 with my boy Rob. And also, we're going to leave you with just a little bit of music, another song that won the Grammys and swept a few of the categories as well. This is my beautiful boy Kendrick Lamar and SZA with Lusa. And we will be right back in just a few minutes. See you on the flip side, everybody. Bye bye.